What happens when a woman rejects everything, even love, in the pursuit of wealth? She's turned down private jets and $50,000 gifts, but what happens when she realizes the price of her ambition might be more than she can afford? Victoria's perfectly manicured finger hovered over her iPhone screen, trembling slightly as she stared at the endless list of contacts. The city lights of Atlanta twinkled below her penthouse window like scattered diamonds, but tonight they felt more like watching eyes, judging her choices. Richard, $50,000 Mercedes gift, rejected. Her finger hesitated for a moment. Richard had looked at her like she was his whole world. She pressed delete anyway. David, $20,000 Gucci shopping spree, rejected. Another pause. David's laugh had been infectious, genuine. Delete. Marcus, private jet weekend to Dubai, rejected. Her hand shook slightly. Marcus had written her poetry. Beautiful, heartfelt poetry that made her feel no delete. She caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, Hermes dress hugging her curves, Brazilian hair cascading down her shoulders like silk. But for the first time, the image felt hollow, like looking at a beautiful mannequin in a store window. Not good enough, she whispered, but her voice cracked. None of them were ever good enough. But what if I'm the one who's not good enough? Do you think money can buy happiness? Because Victoria was about to find out the hard way. Every suitor was just a stepping stone on her path to ultimate luxury. In her mind, settling for a millionaire would be like choosing fool's gold when diamonds were within reach. But deep in her chest, a tiny voice whispered, "What if you're wrong?" The elevator chimed, cutting through her thoughts like a blade. Grace stepped into the apartment, carrying takeaway from their favorite restaurant, her eyes immediately catching Victoria's digital purge. "Vicky, what are you doing?" Grace's voice carried a weight Victoria had never heard before. Victoria's fingers froze over another contact. Something in Grace's tone made her stomach clench. "Spring cleaning! Getting rid of dead weight!" Grace set the food down hard, the containers making a sharp sound against the marble. "Those are good men, Victoria. Men who cared about you. Men who were never worthy of my time!" Victoria's voice rose higher than intended, betraying the fear she'd been pushing down. "I don't have time for anything less than perfection, Grace. I refuse to settle when I know there's something better out there." Grace moved closer, and Victoria could see something dangerous in her sister's eyes. Pity mixed with disappointment. "But Richard was sweet to you. David made you laugh until you cried. And Marcus, Victoria, he looked at you like you were the only woman in the world." Victoria's hand pressed against her chest where a strange ache was growing. She looked around at her designer handbags, her imported furniture, her wall of expensive shoes. When did all of this stop feeling like victory and start feeling like a prison? Sweet doesn't pay for penthouses, Grace. Laughter doesn't buy private jets. She gestured wildly around the lavishly furnished apartment, her voice becoming desperate. "Look at what I have versus what you have. Who's really winning here?" Grace looked around at the Italian leather furniture, the original artwork, the designer, everything. Then her eyes met Victoria's, and Victoria saw something that made her blood run cold. Pity. "But are you happy, Vicky? Really? Truly happy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. Her eyes fell on her Hermes bag. Was it really worth more than genuine laughter? Her gaze shifted to her designer shoes. Did they really make her feel more valuable than being truly seen by someone? Her phone buzzed, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. Victoria's heart skipped a beat before she could even process what was happening. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and time seemed to slow down. Victoria's fingers trembled as she opened the message, each word hitting her like a physical blow. "Girl, remember that oil executive you rejected last month? Martinez? We're engaged. He proposed with a 5-carat diamond last night, and we're flying to Dubai next week for our engagement photo shoot. Thank you for introducing us. He said you were too good for him anyway. Can't wait for you to meet someone who's actually in your league. Ring airplane clinking glasses. Victoria's phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. Sarah was getting married to a man Victoria had deemed not wealthy enough because he only owned 3 oil wells. The room started spinning, and Victoria felt like she was falling through the floor of her own life. "Everything okay?" Grace asked, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Victoria bent to pick up her phone, her hands shaking. She could feel Grace watching her, could feel the walls of her perfect life starting to crack. She forced her smile back into place, but it felt like wearing a mask made of glass. "Perfect," she whispered. "Everything's absolutely perfect." But as the words left her lips, Victoria realized she might have just told the biggest lie of her life. What happens when the queen realizes her throne is built on sand? Victoria was about to discover that some mistakes can't be deleted with a swipe. The sleepless night that followed would change everything. Victoria lay in her king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling as Sarah's message played on repeat in her mind. Each word was like a small knife. Engaged, 5-carat diamond, Dubai, you were too good for him. By 3 a.m., she was pacing her penthouse in silk pajamas, her mind racing. By dawn, a brilliant, dangerous idea had crystallized. Her hands trembled as she dialed Blessing's number. "Blessing, darling, I have something that might change your life." "Victoria, it's 7 a.m. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Remember how you said you wanted to meet a successful man? I have just the person." There was a pause. "Who?" Victoria closed her eyes, crossing a line she'd never crossed before. "Richard. He owns 3 car dealerships, has a house in Los Angeles, and just bought his mother a new home. He's looking for a serious woman." "How do you know all this?" Victoria examined her fresh manicure, hiding the tremor in her voice. "We went out a few times. Nice guy, but not my type. He'd be perfect for you, though. And Blessing." Victoria lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Let's just say he knows how to make a woman very happy in every way that matters." Blessing's gasp was audible. "Really?" "Trust me on this one. Richard is the complete package." "Are you serious? You'd introduce us?" Victoria's heart pounded. "For $500, absolutely. Consider it a consultation fee for premium matchmaking services." What Victoria didn't know was that she'd just opened Pandora's box. Within a week, Victoria's apartment had transformed into something she never expected: headquarters for the most exclusive matchmaking service in Atlanta. Her marble coffee table was covered with printed profiles of her rejected suitors, complete with their financial portfolios, social media screenshots, and detailed notes about their preferences. "Ladies, ladies." Victoria addressed a group of 5 friends gathered in her living room, each clutching a glass of Dom Perignon. Her voice carried a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "What I'm offering you isn't just men. It's pre-screened millionaires, already softened up and ready to commit." Kemi raised her hand, her eyes wide with interest. "How do we know they're actually rich?" Victoria's smile became predatory as she pulled out her phone. "David here bought me this Cartier bracelet on our second date. Marcus flew me to California in his private jet. These men don't play when it comes to spending money on women they're interested in." "And they're all looking for relationships?" asked Funmi, leaning forward eagerly. "Desperately," Victoria replied, feeling a strange mix of power and emptiness. "I've done all the hard work of making them believe in love again. They just need the right woman to appreciate what they have to offer." The system worked like a twisted fairy tale. Victoria charged $500 per contact, $1,000 for detailed dating strategies, and $2,000 for a complete romance package that included the man's favorite restaurants, gift preferences, and emotional triggers. But with each transaction, something inside her grew colder. Within 3 months, the wedding invitations started arriving like beautiful, mocking reminders of what she'd given away. Blessing and Richard, thank you for bringing us together. We've never been happier. Kemi and David, our honeymoon in the Maldives was magical. We owe it all to you. Funmi and Marcus, he proposed on the jet. We're planning a destination wedding in Santorini. Each invitation landed on Victoria's marble coffee table like a small dagger to her soul. At Funmi's wedding reception in the Four Points Hotel, Victoria stood at the bar in a stunning Versace dress, watching her friend dance with Marcus. The same Marcus who had flown her to California and whispered that she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. The irony was suffocating. "Champagne?" the bartender asked. "Double shot of whiskey," Victoria replied, surprising herself. As she watched Funmi twirl in her custom Vera Wang gown, laughing as Marcus whispered something that made her glow with happiness, Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. A hollow ache that all her designer handbags couldn't fill. Her phone buzzed. "Victoria, do you have any more contacts? My cousin is visiting from London and she's looking for a husband." Victoria looked around the reception hall at the 5 couples she'd essentially created, all of them radiating a joy she'd never experienced, and something bitter rose in her throat. The bouquet toss was announced. Single women gathered on the dance floor, and Victoria reluctantly joined them, standing in the back like a spectator to her own life. When Funmi's bouquet sailed through the air and landed directly in Victoria's hands, the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed around her like lightning. "Victoria's next!" someone shouted. "Finally! The Queen finds her king!" another voice called out. Victoria held the bouquet, forcing her widest smile as the world watched. But as she looked at the beautiful flowers, flowers meant for a bride, not a businesswoman selling love to others, her stomach churned with a feeling she finally recognized. Regret. Deep, soul-crushing regret. She was 28 now. The men in her phone were getting younger, and she was getting older. And for the first time, Victoria wondered if she'd been playing the wrong game all along. But Victoria's biggest mistake was still coming. And this time, the hunter was about to become the hunted. Sleep had become Victoria's enemy. She'd lie in her imported Egyptian cotton sheets, staring at the ceiling as her mind replayed every choice that had led her here. The penthouse that once felt like a palace now felt like a beautiful prison of her own making. Grace hadn't visited in weeks. Not since the explosive fight when Victoria had tried to sell her the contact information of a humble banker named Michael. "Vicky, I actually like him," Grace had said, her cheeks flushed with something Victoria barely recognized. Genuine happiness. "We met at church, and he makes me laugh until my stomach hurts." Victoria's response had been swift and cruel. "Grace, be practical. Does he own the bank?" "No, but..." "Then he's not good enough for a woman in our family. I have standards, and so should you." But Grace had chosen Michael anyway, and their Instagram photos told a story Victoria was beginning to understand but couldn't accept. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Victoria found herself stalking those photos late at night, zooming in on their faces, trying to decode what she was seeing. Grace, her little sister who worked as a teacher and lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, looked more radiant than Victoria had ever felt in all her designer glory. The realization hit her like an Atlanta traffic jam, sudden and unavoidable. Grace was happy. Genuinely, soul-deep happy with a man who probably made in a year what Victoria spent on handbags in a month. When Grace announced her engagement to Michael at Sunday family dinner, Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She watched her parents beam with pride, watched Grace's face glow as she showed off a simple but elegant ring that probably cost less than Victoria's monthly beauty treatments. "We're thinking of a small ceremony," Grace said, squeezing Michael's hand like he was her anchor to everything good in the world. "Just family and close friends. Nothing fancy, just real." Congratulations. Victoria managed, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. The word real echoed in her mind for days. At Grace's engagement party in Michael's family compound, Victoria stood alone on the veranda, watching couples slow dance to soft music. The simplicity of it all struck her like a revelation. Paper lanterns, homemade food, relatives singing along to old love songs. But the happiness was more genuine than any of the luxury events she'd attended. This was it, her wake-up call. But instead of learning the lesson, Victoria made a decision that would destroy everything. She was done playing in the minor leagues. If she was going to do this, she was going all the way to the top. Her last hunt would be for the ultimate prize, a tech billionaire. She spent the next week preparing like she was going to war, a $10,000 complete makeover. New hair, new wardrobe, new attitude. She studied Forbes lists, memorized tech industry news, and infiltrated Atlanta's most exclusive business events. 3 weeks later, at a rooftop gala for tech entrepreneurs overlooking the Atlanta skyline, Victoria stood near the infinity pool in a custom-made dress that cost more than most people's cars. She'd positioned herself perfectly, visible to every important man in the room, but appearing disinterested in their attention. That's when Destiny walked toward her, tall, devastatingly handsome, wearing a custom suit that screamed money. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. When their eyes met across the rooftop, Victoria felt her breath catch. He approached slowly, deliberately, like a predator who'd spotted his prey. Or was she the predator, and he the prey? "I'm Sabinus," he said, extending a hand with a $1 million smile that seemed almost too perfect. "I've been watching you all evening. You're either the most confident woman in Atlanta, or you genuinely don't care about impressing anyone here." Victoria felt electricity run down her spine, but something nagged at her. The way he'd said it felt rehearsed, like a line he'd practiced in the mirror. That sounds too polished, too perfect, she thought, but pushed the feeling aside. "I'm Victoria," she replied, letting her hand linger in his despite her brief doubt. "And you're right. I don't care about impressing anyone. I'm far too busy being impressive." Sabinus laughed, a rich sound that made something long dormant in her chest flutter. "I like that. Most women here are trying so hard to get my attention. You're the first one who seems like she doesn't need it." As he spoke, Victoria cataloged everything. The Patek Philippe watch, the confident way he ordered the most expensive champagne without looking at prices, how other guests seemed to defer to him when he walked by. This was it. This was the man she'd been waiting for her entire life. But as their conversation deepened, something unexpected happened. For brief moments, Victoria forgot about his apparent wealth and found herself actually enjoying his company. His laugh was genuine, his questions thoughtful, his attention completely focused on her. "What's your biggest fear?" he asked, as they stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city sprawling below them. The question caught her off guard. "Ending up ordinary," she answered honestly. "And what's your biggest dream?" Victoria paused, surprised by her own answer. "Finding someone who sees me as extraordinary, not just expensive." Sabinus studied her face in the moonlight. "Those aren't the same thing, are they?" "No," Victoria whispered, feeling something crack open inside her chest. "They're not." What Victoria didn't know was that she'd just met her perfect match. A man who was exactly like her in all the wrong ways. Sabinus was everything Victoria had dreamed of and more, which should have been her first warning. On their first official date, he picked her up in a gleaming Lamborghini Huracan that purred like a satisfied predator. "I hope you don't mind Italian," he said as they pulled up to the Marriott Hotel's most exclusive restaurant, where reservations required months of waiting and connections Victoria didn't even have. "How did you get us a table here?" she asked, genuinely impressed and slightly suspicious. Sabinus shrugged with practiced casualness. "I know people. When you're in tech investments, doors open." Inside, The maitre d' greeted him by name, leading them to a private table overlooking the water. Sabinus ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's monthly salary, without even glancing at the price. But Victoria, who had spent years perfecting the art of deception, missed the subtle signs that Sabinus was performing the same dance. "So tell me about your business," Victoria said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Tech investments, mostly. I have stakes in several American fintech startups that are about to go global." He paused to take a sip of wine, and Victoria caught something in his eyes. Was it calculation? "There's also real estate properties in Atlanta, California, and I just bought a place in Dubai. Last week, I had dinner with Drake's manager about investing in his new music label. Nicki Minaj and Burna Boy were there too. Great guys, terrible at business decisions." Victoria felt her heart racing. This wasn't just wealth. This was the stratosphere of American success. But something nagged at her, a tiny voice she chose to ignore. "And you?" Sabinus asked. "What keeps a woman like you busy?" Victoria delivered her perfected line. "I'm in consulting, helping high net worth individuals optimize their lifestyle investments." Technically true. Her matchmaking business was consulting, and her clients were definitely investing in lifestyle changes. Their second date was a masterclass in mutual deception. Sabinus took her shopping on Victini Island, telling her to pick out anything she wanted, while he handled, quote, urgent business calls. Victoria selected a Chanel bag and matching shoes, testing him. He handed over his black American Express card without hesitation. "Don't you want to see the total?" she asked. "If I wanted to see totals, I'd still be counting pennies instead of making millions," he replied with a wink that made her knees weak. What neither of them realized was that they were both running the same con. Grace tried to voice concerns during one of their rare phone conversations. "Something feels off about this Sabinus guy, Vicky. I looked him up online and couldn't find much information about his businesses." Victoria's response was swift and vicious. "Grace, successful people don't put their business on the internet for everyone to see. That's poor people behavior. Finally, I've found a man who matches my standards, and you want to sabotage it with your small-minded thinking?" "I'm not trying to sabotage anything. I just want you to be careful." "Careful?" "Grace, in 3 months, I'll be Mrs. Sabinus, living a life you can't even imagine. Maybe instead of worrying about my relationship, you should focus on upgrading your own pathetic situation." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Grace spoke again, her voice was soft but firm. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Victoria. I really do." 3 months into their whirlwind romance, as Victoria admired her latest gift from Sabinus, a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light like captured starlight, he made a suggestion that sent her heart soaring. "Victoria, I think it's time we took the next step. How would you feel about moving in together?" Victoria's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment she'd been orchestrating her entire adult life. "I'd love that. Perfect. I have the most amazing place in mind. You're going to love it." As Sabinus pulled her close for a kiss, Victoria closed her eyes and smiled. Finally, a man who was everything she'd ever wanted. Rich, handsome, successful, and completely obsessed with her. She had no idea that across town, Sabinus was making the exact same promise to another woman, and another one in Illinois, and one more in London. The hunter was about to become the hunted, but Victoria was too blinded by designer labels and champagne dreams to see the trap closing around her. But what happens when two master manipulators fall in love with each other's lies? Victoria was about to discover that some games have no winners. The penthouse Sabinus claimed as his own was everything Victoria had imagined and more. A stage set for the perfect lie. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble everywhere, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. As she moved her belongings in, Victoria felt like she was finally stepping into the life she'd always deserved. "The decorator did an amazing job," she commented, running her hand along the Italian leather sofa. "Actually, I fired him halfway through," Sabinus said smoothly. "His vision wasn't elevated enough for my taste. Had to bring in someone from Milan to finish the job." What Victoria didn't know was that Sabinus was using his Uncle Mike's apartment as a cover to deceive women. Mike, a telecommunications company founder and nephew of Mike Adenuga, was traveling in Silicon Valley for 6 months and had no idea his apartment was being used for romance scams. Their life together became a perfect symphony of mutual deception. Sabinus would leave early each morning, claiming he had board meetings and investor calls. In reality, he was working his rotation of other women, each of whom believed she was his only serious relationship. Victoria used their arrangement to elevate her social media presence to new heights. Instagram posts from the penthouse, stories featuring Sabinus's business associates, actually Mike's friends who unknowingly became part of his deception, and carefully curated glimpses of their billionaire lifestyle. "My followers have doubled in the past month," Victoria told Sabinus over dinner at Shiro, another impossibly expensive restaurant. "Brands are starting to reach out about partnerships." "That's my girl," Sabinus said, raising his glass of $300 wine. "Beautiful and business-minded. We're gonna rule this city together." Neither mentioned that Victoria had paid for dinner with money from her latest batch of sold phone numbers, or that Sabinus had funded the wine with cash from his latest investment scam victim. But despite the foundation of lies they'd built their relationship on, something unexpected and dangerous was happening to Victoria. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing genuine connection with a man. Sabinus listened when she talked about her dreams, laughed at her jokes, held her when she couldn't sleep. The irony was devastating. She was falling in love with a lie, just as he seemed to be falling for hers. Late at night, when the city was quiet and they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Victoria felt something she'd never experienced before. Contentment that had nothing to do with price tags or social status. "What are you thinking about?" Sabinus would ask, stroking her hair. "Nothing. Everything. I've never felt like this before," she'd whisper, meaning every dangerous word. "Like what? Like I could just be happy with what we have right now, in this moment. Like maybe I've been chasing the wrong things my whole life." Sabinus would pull her closer, and Victoria would feel his heart beating against her chest. In those quiet moments, she forgot about billionaires and bank accounts and social media followers. She just felt complete. "I love you, Victoria," he whispered one night, and her heart nearly stopped. "I love you too," she whispered back, and meant it more than she'd ever meant anything in her life. It was the most honest moment either of them had shared in months. During the day, Victoria continued her matchmaking business, but increasingly, it felt secondary to what she was building with Sabinus. For the first time, Victoria was experiencing what Grace had always talked about, a partnership that made everything better, a connection that filled spaces she hadn't even known were empty. But the house of cards was getting harder to maintain. Sabinus's stories became more elaborate, more unbelievable. He spoke about billion-dollar deals that were just about to close, mentioned buying an airline, claimed he was in talks to partner with Elon Musk on a new satellite project. Then everything changed. Sabinus's behavior shifted dramatically. He became restless, constantly checking his phone, making hushed calls in the bathroom. "Baby, I need to ask you something," he said one evening, his voice unusually tense. "My Uncle Mike is coming back to Atlanta in a few days, and I think it would be better if you went back to your place for a while." Victoria looked up from her pregnancy book, confusion and fear warring in her chest. "Why? I thought you said this was our home now." It is, Sabinus said quickly, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. "But I want to do some construction work, repaint the apartment, maybe renovate the nursery. The fumes wouldn't be good for the baby, and I don't want you to be lonely here while I'm dealing with contractors." Something in his tone made Victoria's stomach tighten, but love made her blind to the obvious lie. Actually, Sabinus continued, sitting beside her and taking her hands, there's something else. I have an urgent investment opportunity, a tech startup that's about to go public. The return will be massive, but I need to move fast. Could you lend me some money? Just temporarily. I'll double it when the deal closes in a few weeks. Victoria's blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed danger. This is exactly what scammers do. Ask for money with promises of doubling it. Her hand instinctively moved to protect her belly. But this is different. This is Sabinus, the father of my child, the man I love. How much do you need? About $74,000. I know it's a lot, but Victoria, this deal will set us up for life. Our child will never want for anything. Victoria stared into the eyes of the man she loved, her heart warring with her mind. Everything rational told her to say no, to protect herself and her baby. But love, or what she thought was love, made her vulnerable in ways she'd never experienced. Am I making another fatal mistake? She wondered, even as the words left her mouth. Okay, for our family. 3 months into their cohabitation, Victoria missed her period. She stared at the pregnancy test in the marble bathroom, watching 2 pink lines appear like a judgment from the universe. Her hands shook as she set the test on the counter. She was carrying the child of a man she believed was a billionaire, a man she'd never actually seen spend his own money, she realized with growing dread. A man who had just asked her for almost all her savings. But more importantly, she was carrying the child of a man she genuinely loved. Victoria looked at herself in the mirror, seeing something new and terrifying in her reflection. Complete vulnerability. The pregnancy test lay on the counter like a small pink bomb, about to explode the carefully constructed world they'd built together. The next morning, Victoria transferred $74,000, almost everything she'd saved from years of selling love to other women, and moved back to her penthouse, which now felt strange and empty after months of sharing space with Sabinus. What happened next would haunt Victoria for the rest of her life. For the first week, Sabinus called regularly, his voice warm and reassuring. The construction is going well, baby. Can't wait to show you the nursery when it's done. But then the calls stopped, completely. Victoria's texts went unanswered for hours, then days. Panic crept up her spine like ice water. When Sabinus finally responded, it was only through text messages, and his responses were brief, distant, wrong. Phone broken, construction loud, miss you, deal taking longer, be patient, love you, call soon. Meanwhile, Grace had been conducting her own investigation. Something about Sabinus had never sat right with her, and her sister's pregnancy had activated every protective instinct she possessed. The private investigator she hired worked faster than Grace had expected. The report arrived on a Thursday morning while Victoria was at her gynecologist appointment, hearing her baby's heartbeat for the first time. Grace sat in her living room with Michael, reading the devastating findings with growing horror. Sabinus' real name, Emeka Okoro. Age, 32. No registered businesses. No property ownership. Current address, unknown. Appears to be homeless. Criminal record, multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and romance scams dating back 5 years. Known associates, none of the celebrities or business leaders he claims to know. Current status, active investigation by Atlanta State Police for defrauding investors of over $5,000. The file included photos that made Grace's blood run cold. Sabinus with other women, identical poses, identical promises, identical lies. He wasn't just lying to Victoria, he was running the same con on at least 4 other women simultaneously. "Grace, what do we do?" Michael asked, his face pale with shock. "We tell my sister the truth, even if she hates me for it." That evening, as Victoria returned from her doctor's appointment with ultrasound photos in her purse and hope in her heart, Grace was waiting in the penthouse lobby with a manila envelope that would destroy everything. "Victoria, we need to talk, now." "Grace, I don't have time for whatever drama you're bringing. I just heard the baby's heartbeat and I want to call Sabinus." "Victoria, stop." Grace's voice was firm in a way Victoria had never heard before. "Sabinus isn't who you think he is. He's not who any of us think he is." The confrontation that followed would change both their lives forever. Victoria's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the private investigator's report. Each line hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Homeless, no registered businesses, multiple fraud charges, romance scammer. The photos were the worst part. Sabinus with other women, using identical pickup lines, making identical promises, wearing the same watch she'd thought was a Patek Philippe but was apparently a convincing fake. The truth crashed over her like a tsunami of devastation. "Victoria?" Sabinus's voice came from behind her. She spun around to see him stepping out of the elevator, his face lighting up when he saw her, until he noticed Grace's expression and the envelope in Victoria's hands. The mask fell from Sabinus's face so completely that Victoria almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the confident billionaire, replaced by a cornered man whose eyes darted between Victoria and the exit. "Emeka Okoro," she said quietly, reading his real name from the report. "Victoria, I can explain," Sabinus started, but his voice was shaking now, the confident facade completely gone. "Explain what?" Victoria's voice rose to a scream, her composure shattering completely. "That everything you've told me is a lie? That you're broke? That you're wanted by the police? That you stole my money? That you—" Her voice cracked as the full horror hit her. "That you made me fall in love with someone who doesn't even exist? Baby, listen." Sabinus reached for her, desperation in his eyes. "Don't call me baby." Victoria backed away like he was poison. "You lied about everything. Your name, your money, your business, your feelings." She pressed both hands to her stomach, her voice becoming a whisper of pure anguish. "God, what have I done to my child? What kind of mother am I?" "The baby is real," Sabinus said, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine desperation. "My feelings for you are real. Victoria, I swear to you, I love you." "Love?" Victoria laughed, but it came out like a sound of someone drowning. "You don't even know what love means. Just like I didn't know what love meant until—" She stopped, the full weight of her realization crashing over her like a building collapse. "Until what?" Grace asked softly. "Until I fell in love with a lie." Victoria looked at Sabinus with tears streaming down her face. "And the worst part is, I'm just like you. I'm exactly like you." The truth spilled out of her then, everything she'd been hiding for years. Her maxed out credit cards, the rent she'd been covering with money from selling phone numbers, the fact that she'd been living beyond her means for so long that she couldn't remember what her actual means were. "You're both broke?" Grace asked, looking between them in complete disbelief. "Worse than broke," Victoria whispered. "We're both professional liars who fell in love with each other's lies." Sabinus tried one last desperate play. "Victoria, we can figure this out. I have some deals that are about to come through. We can build something real together." "More lies!" Victoria screamed, her voice breaking with the force of her anguish. "When will you stop? When will I stop?" She threw the report at him, papers scattering across the marble floor like the remains of her shattered dreams. Get out now before I call the police myself." "Victoria, please, get out." Sabinus looked at her for a long moment, and Victoria saw something almost like genuine regret in his eyes. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator, his expensive facade crumbling with each step. As the elevator doors closed, Victoria's legs gave out. She sank onto the cold marble floor, the weight of her situation crushing her like a physical force. She was pregnant, broke, and completely alone. The woman who had once rejected millionaires couldn't afford to buy groceries. Her phone buzzed with a notification. An eviction notice sent via email. She was 3 months behind on rent, and the building management company was demanding immediate payment. Victoria looked around the penthouse that had been her throne, her stage, her proof that she was better than everyone else. In 12 hours, she would have to leave it all behind. With nowhere else to turn, and her pride in ruins around her feet, Victoria found herself standing outside Grace's modest 2-bedroom apartment in Suitor. Her suitcases sat at her feet like surrendered weapons. Victoria raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Her fingers trembled in the air as years of arrogance warred with desperate need. I mocked this place. I mocked Grace's simple life, her modest happiness. I called it pathetic. Through the window, she could see Grace and Michael cooking dinner together, laughing as Michael tried to flip something in a pan and nearly dropped it. They looked so happy, so content in their simple life. Everything Victoria had dismissed as not enough was everything she now desperately craved. When did I become someone who needed to swallow my pride just to have a place to sleep? Victoria pressed her hand to her growing belly, feeling her child move for the first time. I'm about to be someone's mother, and I don't even have a home. I threw away every good thing in my life chasing fool's gold. She took a shuddering breath and knocked on the door, finally ready to learn what real love actually looked like. But would it be too late to save herself? And what about the innocent child she was carrying into this wreckage?